everyone, it's Elizabeth Wilson from the Perth Pilates studio, and today I'm going to be taking you through a fascial fitness workshop focused on release of the fascial system of our body. So this technique that we're working with today is incredibly beneficial for anyone who suffers from stress, tension, tightness, or even low-grade sort of chronic pain type issues. So the fascial system that we're going to be focusing on today is a system of connective tissue that is continuous throughout our entire body. We tend to, when we talk about fascia, we tend to think about fascia often in relationship to the muscles. So if you're not so familiar with what fascia is, it's basically, we know it most commonly as that connective tissue sheath that kind of surrounds the muscles of the body. You know, if you're cooking chicken breast and you kind of pull a chicken breast apart and you've got almost that white sort of film that divides and separates the muscles, that would be fascia, or the connective tissue of the body. But the fascia doesn't just run around the outside of our muscles. It also runs through the muscles, between each individual cell of our muscle fibers, and actually from the outside cell membrane right into the very center of the cell and in and around the cell nucleus. So the fascia of the muscles is a really continuous system through the musculature. But in addition, the fascia is continuous from the muscles to every other organ system in our body and every other cell in the body. It's the primary mechanism by which movement in our body is transferred throughout our entire organism. And it's the fascial system of our body that is responsible for issues in one part of our body being created by a problem somewhere else, somewhere completely distant. So for example, sometimes I might see someone in my studio who has neck issues, and maybe they've done lots of work on, addressing that area of pain in the neck, trying to stretch out the neck or strengthen the neck or mobilize the neck, for example, or around the closely associated areas such as the upper back and the shoulders. And it doesn't really make a big difference in terms of their pain or discomfort or stiffness or tightness. And then, we might one day, for example, go in and do a release perhaps on a very distant part of the body, such as the foot, and that has a significant flow-on effect in terms of releasing what's going on around their neck. So the fascial system is responsible for those connections between one part of our body and another distant part. Fascial research is kind of like one of the hot topics in movement research at the moment. And so in recent times, we've come to understand a whole lot more about how the fascial system of the body works and why it's important. So the fascial system is extremely important in that it contains most of the sensory nerve endings in our body. So when our fascia becomes tight or compressed, one of the problems that we can run into is we get abnormal compression of the sensory nerve endings contained within the fascia, and this can actually create symptoms of pain or discomfort or tension that we might become aware of as being a problematic issue. The other thing to be aware of with fascia is today we're going to be working with quite a different approach from what you might have done before if you've done any sort of release for the fascial system before, like if you've done foam rolling or rolling on little balls, spiky balls, different massage balls, things like that. Typically speaking, when people roll on a foam roller or when they roll on balls and they're thinking about sort of releasing the fascia, often they're talking about releasing the myofascial system, which is the muscular system and the associated fascia. And often they go in with a quite, shall we say, heavy-handed approach, where they're trying to really stretch out and lengthen the fascia, or, that's in their head what they're thinking about doing. Now, what you want to realize with the fascia of your body, it is a somewhat elastic tissue. It has a bit of give, but it's not really designed to be a stretchy sort of a tissue like our muscles. So the fascia of the body is actually designed to give a certain amount of support to our body. And we don't necessarily want to stretch it out as long as we possibly can. The muscles, if we stretch them, they're designed to stretch and then contract. So they're designed to, if you elongate them, they'll then come back to their normal sort of resting length. Whereas the connective tissues, if you stretch them and stretch them and stretch them, it's a bit like overstretching a rubber band. There's a certain point where you sort of overstretch them to the point where they're too loose and floppy and they can't spring back as much as they should be able to. So our goal with working with the fascia shouldn't necessarily be to sort of stretch it out as much as we possibly can. Rather, instead, we're going to be today taking a slightly different approach. When your fascia is under constant stress. Now, this may occur, for example, if you're doing a really repetitive activity. Let's say you're a runner, and as you go long distance running, your body is going through the same movement pattern over and over again. And so you can imagine that the fascia surrounding the muscles that are being utilized to run can come under a lot of tension again and again and again. Certain areas of the fascia will come under compression. And what tends to happen when any area of the fascia is put under constant tension or constant compression is the extracellular fluid that normally would bathe the connective tissue cells and bathe the connective tissue fibers that make up the fascia kind of gets pressed out and compressed out of the fascia. The same thing happens not when we're just doing repetitive movements, but also when we suffer from a repetitive lack of movement. So if I'm sitting at a desk all day with the classic computer desk posture, all of the muscles through the back of my body are under, and the fascia through the back of my body is under a constant certain amount of tension, and it can get tight and compressed. Again, the extracellular fluid around that area within the fascia gets kind of forced out. And it's that forcing out of the extracellular fluid from the fascia and the resulting basically dehydration of the fascia that can lead the fascia, the connective tissue of the body, to become stuck and stiff. So when we move, instead of gliding and moving and sliding freely, we get areas of stuck tension or stress. What we're going to be focusing on today is approaches that are geared towards rehydrating the fascial system of the body. So we'll be using techniques of compression and decompression, basically to pump back extracellular fluid into the fascial system, loosen up, lubricate the fascial system, and effectively, as a result, help you to move more freely and efficiently, and potentially with less discomfort and less pain as we reduce that excessive compression on our sensory nerve fibers in the fascia. So that's the purpose of what we're going to be working with today. Now, to that end, the props that I'm going to be working with are a little bit different from what you may have experienced previously. So you'll see down here I've got a foam roller and I've got a little ball, which is, nothing particularly exciting and different. But the ball that I'm using with today is a lot softer than what you may have potentially previously used before when you've been doing sort of release type work. So it does have a very different feel from what you may be used to working with. And the foam roller that I'm working with is not your stock standard foam roller, it's actually a very soft foam roller. So it has a lot more give in it than a regular hard foam roller. And when we do release work on this roller, you can actually sink and release the muscles and the fascia into it a lot more deeply than working with a hard foam roller. Sometimes when we're trying to do release work on a hard foam roller, because the sensations we get from the hard roller are quite intense, we can inadvertently hold a certain amount of tension in our body, and we can not relax and release into the position as much as we will with something that's got a bit more give. So we won't get the same degree of release as we would on a hard roller. The other thing also is if you are using harder surfaces like a hard foam roller or a hard ball, like a golf ball or something like that, for example, to roll on feet, what can also happen sometimes is we can actually irritate the fascia if we're doing lots of release work on it, and it can actually sometimes become a little bit inflamed in that process, which can actually have the opposite effect from what we're desiring in our release. So they're very specific balls and very specific rollers that we're using, but in the manual, the handout that you have to download for today's workshop, you'll actually find details on some different options that you can use in terms of sourcing these materials, and I'll indicate also if you've already got, for example, a traditional sort of hard foam roller, how you can perhaps modify that to make it more suitable for these exercises, and where you can find either the same foam roller as I'm working with today and the same ball as I'm working with today, or where you can find sort of locally available substitutes that are good, cost-effective alternatives if you're looking for those. Okay? So from here, let's get going, and we're going to start off with our first little release sequence.